o'clock East Coast time. Greetings from Georgia State University Center for International Business Education and Research, CIBER, in Atlanta, Georgia. I'm Leanne Liu. This is our 58th webinar since April 2020. We come to you on behalf of the MSI CIBER Consortium that are sponsoring, organizing, and running this webinar series. The webinars are being recorded. You can find previous sessions at our GSU-CIBER website or our YouTube channel. When you exit this session, you will be directed to a brief survey of 5 questions. So please respond and give us feedback and ideas for future topics. Handouts and the materials from the speaker, when they are available, will be emailed to you. Everyone except the panelists is muted. Please use the Q&A button for the questions for your question to the panelists. Today's webinar is another collaboration with Emerald Publishing. It's part 3 of a 3-part series on developing global teaching materials, global case teaching materials. As in previous sessions, the moderator is Professor Murad Dakhli of Georgia State University, who himself is a master teacher and case writer. Thank you, Murad, for moderating this session with our featured speaker, Professor Rebecca Morris, the editor-in-chief of the Case Journal. With that, I will now turn to Murad.
Thank you, Leanne. And welcome, everyone. And as I can see, welcome back to so many of you. As Dr. Liu mentioned, this is our 3rd installment of the Global Case Teaching Material Workshop, how to develop, write, and publish compact cases. Please go ahead and add your name and city maybe to the chat. I saw that quite a few have done so already. Would love to know where you're joining us from. As a reminder, and for those of you who are joining us for the first time, on September 16th, the first offering of the 3-part workshop focused on generating ideas that work, developing learning objectives for the case, and the components of a compelling compact case. The second part was on October 7th, and the focus was on drafting compact cases. A few of you submitted your case drafts for consideration, and these were reviewed by our workshop leader, Professor Rebecca Morris. Today, on this 3rd installment and last installment, we shift attention to writing the instructor manual for this compact case and navigating the publication process. So let me introduce our workshop leader, Dr. Rebecca Morris, who is the editor-in-chief of the Case Journal and is the past president and fellow of the Case Association and a past president and fellow of the North American Case Research Association, NACRA. Dr. Morris' cases have been published in the top 3 case journals: the Case Research Journal, the Case Journal, and the Business Case Journal. 2 of the cases she mentored as a faculty supervisor have won NACRA's Best Student Author Case Awards. Dr. Morris' cases on Nike, GlaxoSmithKline, Abbott Labs, and Kodak have appeared in more than 20 textbooks, including all of the major textbooks in strategic management. She has also served as the editor-in-chief of the Case Journal since 2016. During this time, the journal moved from 3 issues per year to 6 issues per year. Dr. Morris writes editorial letters on case writing, case research, and case teaching. Many of her editorial letters have been listed in the most frequently downloaded articles of the year. Currently, Dr. Morris serves as chair of the Economics and Management Department at Westfield State University in Westfield, Massachusetts, and has previously taught strategic management and international business for 32 years at the University of Nebraska at Omaha. So, Dr. Morris, one more time, we are all honored to have you with us, and the floor is yours.
Thank you. Let me get my screen going. I think I probably do have it going.
Yes, there you are.
And we're going to play this one. So today we're going to talk about the road to case publication. And I'm sort of sad to say that this is our last time together because I really have enjoyed it. And so I want to thank all you cyber friends for coming to the webinar today. We're going to talk about I have a new computer, so excuse me a little bit here. Oh, it's not wanting to do that. Okay, so I have a little roadmap for us today. So we are going to talk about the instructor's manual, and I'm going to tell you secrets. And I'm going to tell you about the secret component to a published case. And the reason that I say it's secret is that instructor's manuals don't actually get published. They're only released to people that are verified as instructors. So if you think about it, if you've ordered cases from the Harvard Business Review, the Harvard Business Publishing, you have to be vetted before you can get the instructor's manual. And this is to keep it out of the hands of students. So a lot of people aren't aware of what's entailed, what is required in an instructor's manual. So we'll talk about that. We'll also talk about how you can improve your chances of getting your case published by adding some value-added components, the special sauce to your instructor's manual. Finally, we'll talk about how to get it ready, your case and your instructor's manual ready for the journal that you target. And then we'll talk a little bit about the review process and some tips for navigating that. So let's get started. Whoops, the wrong way. With the next thing. So one of the things I think that it's useful to think about is who are the audiences for the instructor's manual. And so I've identified the primary three, and you'll notice that students are not the primary audience. They benefit from a good instructor's manual, but they never really see it. So the first one I want to talk about is the case writer. And we talked about this in an earlier session where we started with some learning objectives and then developed a case. Some case writers will write a rough draft of the instructor's manual before they even start the case. And they use that as, in a sense, a plan for the case itself. So if I'm going to ask certain discussion questions, then I have to be able to provide the information so that students can answer those questions. And so they'll use this rough draft of an instructor's manual to kind of guide what goes in the case and what stays out of the case. A second audience would, and this I would say is one of the primary ones, is the instructors themselves. If your case is published, you'd like other people to adopt your case and use it. And so one of our goals at the Case Journal is to make sure that we provide really extensive materials for any instructor that wants to use a different case. And so we want the person who has adopted your case to be able to teach it as well as you can. And one of the things as case writers we often learn is that if we're teaching our own case, we embellish a little bit. So if it looks as if the students are confused, we add more information. We say, oh, let me explain that to you. Now, if I'm going to use your case, you won't be there with me when I teach it, and I won't have the benefit of your knowledge. And so what we try to do with our instructor's manual then is to put enough in the instructor's manual that I can feel comfortable teaching your case and do as well with it as you might. And then the third audience are evaluators. This would be like deans and accreditation committees. One of the things that's important for us to recognize as we talk about instructors' manuals is that AACSB, which most of us are familiar with, uses the instructor's manual as the scholarly contribution of case writing. And so rather than being something that we just kind of dash off quickly, we really should pay a lot of attention to the instructor's manual because it is the major scholarly contribution. So let's talk about what goes in the instructor's manual. This diagram shows the different components, and I'm going to start at the top with the green, and we'll talk about what goes into each of these different sections. So first we start with a synopsis, and the synopsis, as you might guess, is an overview of what the case is about. But one of the things to remember when writing in the instructor's manual is that you're writing it for as a marketing piece, in a sense, for your case itself. You want people to use your case because that is impact. And so you want people to know enough about what the case is about that they'll choose your case. So the synopsis is not the opening hook of your case. It could be part of that, but it describes what goes on in the case, but it also focuses on what are the learning outcomes that a student might gain by studying this case. What might the learning objectives be, what courses it might be used in, and all those kind of things. So the synopsis is a little bit broader than just a short overview. And you want to write it well so that people read it and say, yes, I really want to use this case. It's exciting, it's interesting, I think students would like it, and I want to use this for my course. So the synopsis can be generally less than a page in terms of length, because again, if it's too long, nobody's going to read it far enough to know whether they want to use your case or not. The second component, and I'm going to the clockwise here, is the intended audience. And the intended audience here we're describing, is it used as a case designed for undergraduate students? Is the case designed for graduate students, executive level? What course might it be used for? And we need to be careful about this section of the instructor's manual. It's often tempting to try to increase the number of adoptions that we might have for a case by saying it could be used in almost every course that's ever taught in the world. And that probably is a little too ambitious. So, it's better to identify a specific course, preferably one that you already teach, and say, this case is used in a strategic management or an international business course. And you could even talk about at what stage of the course would this case be most beneficial. It might go with chapter 4 or whatever, topic you might want to identify, and that the students need to have some prior knowledge before they attempt the case. And you would identify that in the intended audience. It's okay to say that a case could be used at similar courses for both the undergraduate and graduate level, but generally, if you say that, then people will have different expectations about what kind of analysis and recommendations you might have at the undergraduate level versus the graduate. The purple tab there is the learning objectives, and we talked about learning objectives when we first got together with the very first episode of this series. And learning objectives for a compact case, we're looking for probably no more than 4 learning objectives. And we typically will use Bloom's taxonomy verbs to describe, in completing this case, the student should be able to, and we'll list, identify macro environmental factors that would impact a business. And then we tend to also sequence those in terms of the taxonomy, starting with, I would call them the softball objectives, the things that are easy to accomplish first. And we want some progression through the objectives so that at the end, we're at the top of the taxonomy and we're asking students to create or recommend or design some project, a strategy, evaluating alternatives and things like that. So the learning objectives part is really critical. And in fact, a lot of reviewers for journals will turn to the instructor's manual before they start the review. They'll look at the learning objectives that you've identified and say, okay, this is what this person wants this case to do. Now I'm going to read the case and make sure that there's enough material that students could actually accomplish those objectives. The blue tab there is really critical, and it's often overlooked by a lot of people that write instructors' manuals on their first round, because this is the piece that AACSB has identified as the critical piece for calling this scholarly contribution. And that is, we have to identify theoretical linkages that are relevant to the case. In a sense, this reads a little bit like a lit review in an empirical paper, where we're identifying the theories relevant to what we're trying to demonstrate, and we are explaining those. Now, if you're writing a case for international business and maybe it has strategic implications, there would be lots of different frameworks, models, theories that you might incorporate. And typically we will identify those, but maybe not spend a great deal of depth on common things like Porter's 5 forces or a macro environmental analysis, PESTLE, if you will. But we would identify things that are perhaps unique or special with our case. So your case might be, my GlaxoSmithKline case was about differential pricing internationally and how some countries are subsidizing drugs and their prices are significantly lower. And, in the United States, we are paying full price and our prices are higher. So that differential pricing piece in that international business case was unique or different. And so I spent more of my theory section talking about that than I did, that you might do a Porter's 5 forces, or you might do some competitor analysis. So you have to choose which theories you're going to talk about. If it's not a theory or a model that's commonly in textbooks, then you might want to use that to explain what theory or framework should be there. And sometimes in the theoretical linkages section, people will provide additional readings for background in theories that are perhaps newer or less commonly used. And when you do that, when you provide the additional readings, please be sure to indicate whether this is something that the instructor must assign to students before discussing the case, or whether it's for the instructor's background purposes, so that people can make appropriate plans for how they want to use the case. Going around again now to discussion questions and answers. These go in 2 places. First, we provide a list of the discussion questions after the theory. And this list is intended to help the adopting instructor very quickly make a decision about whether they want to use your case or not. So if you had 4 learning objectives, it would be appropriate to have about 4 or 5 discussion questions. And you would just basically list them 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, so that the adopting instructor can quickly read it and say, yes, those are the kinds of things I want this, to talk about in my class. And then you'll repeat the discussion question 1, and then you'll provide a complete answer to that question. Typically, the answer it needs to be completely worked out. So if it's a financial question and there's some calculations that need to be made, you would provide all of that in your answer so that the adopting instructor would know, what you intended there and how it should work out. You might also, in your answers to discussion questions, talk about what A students will typically say and what average students will typically say. So sometimes the average student might miss the subtlety, they might miss some important thing in some insight that they didn't perhaps do, and you might even provide in the answer. Typically, people that don't really understand the issues that we're talking about will say this, but here's how, as an instructor, you might move them to recognize the things that they're missing. So complete discussion questions and answers. If there's analysis and you want to use a template for doing a country analysis, you would provide that and have a completed one so that the adopting instructor would know what they should expect from their students. If there are things that are commonly missed in terms of the student analysis, you might put those into the answers to the discussion questions so that somebody else that uses your case could guide students better. The teaching strategies, basically you're telling people usually a timeline for how many minutes should they anticipate the discussion to last. And you might even break it into sections. So in the first case, we might do discussion question 1 and we might allocate 10 minutes to that. In the second question, we might allocate 25. And the third one's really important, so we might give it a little bit more time. So it's a lot of times a plan for how you would teach the case. And because a lot of us are teaching online these days, there's a lot of interest in teaching strategies to use the case online. Do you use breakout rooms, and how might you set those up? Do you do it in a discussion board? And what might be the prompts that you would use to get students to discuss the various pieces? Can it be used in a synchronous environment, or does it need to have an asynchronous environment? How long do you leave the discussion open? All those kind of tips are really useful to the person that might use your case. So all of these things go into the instructor's manual. And I believe one of the times that we were talking about compact cases, the compact case is designed to be 1,000 words and read in 15 minutes. And so it's about a page and a half to 2 pages long. And people ask, well, then how long is the instructor's manual? And I will tell you that it's typically longer than the case itself. So an instructor's manual could be in the range of 10 to 15 pages. And it's important that you recognize that, because you will save yourself some rounds of review if you do a good job on the instructor's manual to begin with, rather than waiting for the reviewers to tell you, this is too short, it doesn't have enough information. You might need to do a major revision on the instructor's manual. And what you'll find is typically, my experience is that the reviewers will laser point focus on the instructor's manual and making sure that that is providing the scholarly contribution it should, and also providing the instructional support that it should. And so I typically have had to spend more time revising my instructor's manual than I did the case itself. I may be unique in that way, but the instructor's manual really is critical for reviewers, and they spend a lot of time providing feedback on how that can be improved and enhanced. And now let's move. Whoop, I keep going the wrong way. Sorry. There. One of the things that reviewers also look for is an alignment. And what they want is alignment between the case and the instructor's manual, and then internally within the instructor's manual. So on this little balance here, we've got case facts and case exhibits. Cases are supposed to be self-sustaining, in that all of the facts that students need to be able to do the analysis are supposed to be in the cases. And the instructor's manual is not supposed to introduce new topics or issues. And so we want to make sure that the case and the learning objectives are aligned well with one another, but also that we haven't introduced new topics, new information, new facts in the answers to the discussion question, because that is unfair to students. Basically, they don't get to see the instructor's manual. So if you're giving additional information, you're disadvantaging the students and making it much harder for them to do the analysis that you expect. So in order to get things, you'll occasionally get a reviewer that'll say, oh, here's a new fact in your instructor's manual. You need to move that into the case because it needs to be there. So how do you add some value to your instructor's manual? You could do it by including innovative and interesting pedagogy in your teaching strategies, things like board plans, role plays, video clips. If you do video clips, it's useful to describe the content of the video clips. So things like YouTubes or news reports that are related to your case issues can be very beneficial to either introduce the case or at certain sections of the discussion. So you might tell here's the link to the video clip, here's how long it lasts, and here's when I would use it, and what it might contain. Small group exercises, this would be particularly useful if you're talking about teaching a case online, because breakout rooms, we could put people in breakout rooms and use a small group exercise to engage more students. And then we could also enhance the theory discussion section. So we could highlight newer models or theories. I mean, I teach strategic management, and we really don't need a whole lot of cases that do only Porter's 5 forces. We need cases that do more than that. And so you might want to, yes, have them do Porter's 5 forces, but also highlight something else that's relevant and might be an addition to the literature. You might want to illuminate contradictions. Differential pricing is supposed to be a good thing, but when it has people in neighboring countries going across and buying drugs someplace else because they're cheaper, it doesn't work so well. So, I mean, sometimes it's useful to say, okay, this particular example contradicts the theory, and it could be a useful discussion point for the case. Anything that provides a fresh perspective. And so the point is that if we do these things, if you add these things to your instructor's manual, reviewers respond well to that because your generosity is appreciated. And typically you'll get a much more positive review because you have gone a little bit farther than you needed to in order to help that instructor. And so that generally results in a much more positive review. Any additional readings or supplemental materials, you might be aware of some government report that's related that you might want to highlight. And again, provide the link to so that other people would know that, and share that. And again, that's just being generous with information that would help people teach your case more effectively. So things to do before you submit. We talked about this before, but I wanted to just remind, typically you want to classroom test your case before you submit it to a journal. In fact, our submission form asks if you've tested the case. You want to make any revisions that to correct any problems that you noticed when you were teaching the case. Where did you talk and add information? And you want to make sure that that goes into the case. We usually advocate that you present the case at a workshop, like NACRA, Eastern Academy, the Case Association does them. There are lots of regional NACRA organizations and also world case organizations that you could submit your case to. A lot of the organizations are operating virtually these days with their annual meetings, and so you might be able to participate in one that's very remote from where you are. But these typically will have a roundtable workshop format where everyone reads your case and then provides feedback to help you improve it and get it into publication ready form. So you want to go to the conference, take the feedback, and then you want to come back and revise once more before you submit. So you're going to hit the submit button, and I'm hoping you're going to submit it to the case journal so that we can consider your case. But now let's talk about the review process. This is one of my favorite peer review cartoons. This is not the way we do things at the Case Journal. It's not the way most case journals operate. You don't have to be like the little scientist at the corner of the cartoon that's going to run through that gauntlet to get his paper accepted. We don't beat people up through the review process. Most case organizations consider themselves developmental organizations, and they will stick with the case and provide feedback and allow the opportunity for revision far longer than most empirical journals will do. It's not unusual for us to have cases that will go through 5 or 6 rounds of review before they're accepted. I mean, we do have some that get accepted pretty readily, but we want to, if there's an element of greatness in there, we want to tease that out. So we will stay with you and not beat you up. So typically journals use a double-blind review, and we at the Case Journal, we pick reviewers for these 3 categories. Reviewers that have subject matter expertise. So if your case is an international business case, we would pick somebody that has that kind of expertise that could review. We also pick people that are familiar with case pedagogy. They know how to effectively teach with cases, and they will look at whether the case, they believe it will work well in the classroom. And then we also have a review board that has a lot of case writing experience. So two reviewers, typically one subject matter and then one with either pedagogy or case writing experience, so that we can get people that have the knowledge to really enhance or help you develop your case. The focus of the reviews, first we look for information sufficiency, that there's enough information in the case so that students can address case issues. We also look for data accuracy, that the data in the exhibits are correct and they're properly displayed. We look for things like objectivity. The information in the case is in a fair and unbiased manner. Remember, we talked about that you wanted to have kind of a journalistic perspective. You want to present both sides of an issue rather than have the case be only focused on one side of an issue. And we also want to make sure that you, the case writer, don't do the work for the students. So evaluation and critical analysis is left to the students. It's not contained in the case, because if it is, the case is not very engaging, because the students say, well, what am I supposed to do? You already told me what, the main issues are. So you want to make sure that you have set it up so that the students have something to do. Interest and engagement is another piece that we look for. And, this is a hard one. It's a little bit subjective. As, a reviewer, you're looking, is this case interesting and would it engage today's student? There are just some things that people like to do in case writing that you look at it and you say, there's no student that would read this case any further because it's so boring at the beginning that they're never going to get to the end to understand what the issues are. So we look to see, are these cases interesting? Would they engage today's student? Yes, I could write a case about Ford Motors and Henry Ford, but I just suspect that it wouldn't have the same impact as if I wrote about some of the challenges that Ford Motors is experiencing today. Impact, these are actually items on the review form. Does the case make a significant contribution to the literature? Does it have new and significant information, or is it like the 6th version of a case that on the company that I've already got? So looking for those kind of things, and that the instructor's manual addresses important topics in the courses that it's targeting, that it's going to really make a difference in our literature. And then instructional support. We want to make sure that there's sufficient instructional support so that others can teach the case effectively. This is becoming really critical today, because if you look at who's teaching in a lot of our business schools, we have an awful lot of adjunct faculty that don't have the same training perhaps as some of our full-time faculty. And then we have people that are coming in from practice that know a lot about the business environment, but maybe don't know the theories and models as well as you do. And so providing good support for those people that are teaching perhaps for the first time, becoming much more critical these days. So why should you go through the review process? It does sound a little painful, but if generally it does improve your case, and that means that it gets more adoptions. And some people are using the number of case adoptions as a demonstration of impact on accreditation studies. So if your case is an award winner at the Case Center, then you would be able to tout that, and that would be an indication of the impact and reach of your case. High quality cases also help me as a journal editor demonstrate the quality of the journal. And then finally, it goes down to our accrediting bodies and promotion and tenure committees that are interested in you demonstrating the quality and impact of your research. And case research tends to be a little difficult to demonstrate. We don't get cited like other articles do. And so we don't have some of the same metrics that some of the others do. So again, you have, getting it published in a high quality journal can help. Having a lot of adoptions can help you make your case for the impact or importance of your work. Here's probably what you think journals do. I love cartoons. So you probably think, as the man on the left of the slide does, he's submitting his life's work and it goes in a black box someplace, and some of them get spit out as rejected papers, and then some of them get shot out the back end of the machine, and somebody has to catch them in this really small little funnel. That's not actually how we work. we work more like this. So basically you submit your case, and as editor of the case journal, I do an initial review. And I have to decide, is it okay to send it out for review, or do I need to have the author do something? So sometimes I can't send it out because it has the author's names in it. So I can't do a blind review. And so I would send it back to the authors and say, could you please fix this? Sometimes I reject cases at this point if they're clearly fictional cases. We talked about this in an earlier webinar about the fact that we don't print fictional cases. And so if I suspect that it's fictional, this is where it would end. Sometimes it's just not a good fit for the journal. And so sometimes it gets rejected, not as much as you would think, but typically then it moves on and we begin to assign reviewers. This process takes a while. Reviewers have to accept the review, and then we have to wait for them to do the review. And so it says, you know, it could take days or months. Yes, unfortunately, reviewers don't always respond to my invitation. Please review this case. And, you know, we're picking people because we think that they really have a lot to offer to the authors. But sometimes we're all busy and we just can't review when we want to. And so if the reviewers accept, then we have to wait for the reviews. And we usually give reviewers about 45 days, and then we start sending out reminders. So you wait for the reviews, and then once the reviews are in, I have to make a decision. And so as editor, I have 4 big options here. I can accept the case as it is, I can do a major revision, or I can do a minor revision. And finally, I can reject. Typically, I won't reject a case after it's gone through the review process unless the authors have stopped making revisions that reviewers are asking for, or I just, you know, we've gone as far as we can with it. It still isn't acceptable to the reviewers. I don't really want you to spend a lot of time revising a case that has no chance. So typically, if we believe that it just isn't going to be developed well enough to publish, then we, out of kindness, want to reject it so that you don't, you know, really devote a lot of time to it. But let's talk about the happier options. Typically, the first round of review, you will get either a major revision or a minor revision. The difference is here, a major revision, if there are structural issues with the case, if things are not in the right order, there's information missing, grammatically it's not correct, it has some concerns, it'd be a major revision. A minor revision is usually something that has small things that need to be fixed, like there's typos or grammatical errors. The case itself holds up pretty well. The instructor's manual holds up pretty well, but there are just some small things. Let's, you know, reword one of the discussion questions or something like that. So if you get a major revision letter, it clearly says this is a major revision. We do not expect to see that case back the next day. We expect you to spend some time to thoughtfully revise and incorporate the reviewer's comments. A minor revision, we could see the next day. I mean, it might just be a few cleanups. Oh, one of your graphs didn't produce really well. Can you redo that graph? I mean, it might not take long to fix. And, you know, if we get a minor revision, sometimes I don't even send it back to the reviewers. If it's minor and truly minor, I can accept it right after that. So you'd submit your draft and I would hit accept on the next one and say, yep, this one's ready to go. After I verified it though. But the major revision, I mean, occasionally people do make that mistake. There are lots of things that the reviewers have identified. In my letter, I've identified things that I want the author to work on, and it'll turn around in less than a week. And it's pretty clear that they did not do the things that we asked them to do. One of the quickest ways to get to that reject letter is to ignore reviewers. If they've asked you to do something, you are obligated to tell them what you did or why you did not make the change they requested. I mean, it's perfectly acceptable to disagree with the reviewer and say, the reviewer wants me to take it in this direction, but I don't have that information. This is a field research case, and that's not what happened. Okay, you write that in your response to the reviewers, and we move on. But if you just ignore a reviewer comment, they're like a dog with a bone. they will not let it go. And so what happens is they get frustrated and sometimes they bail out. And if they bail out after one round of review, then I have to bring in another reviewer, and that reviewer may find more things wrong. So you really want to keep the reviewers, have them stick with your case. And to do that, you need to be respectful of the time that they've spent on the review by telling them, yes, I agree, I made the change that you requested, thank you very much. Or no, I did not make the change you requested, and here's why. You know, sometimes reviewers will say, well, make up a quote for the protagonist to have them say this in a quote. And you're not supposed to do that because that would be fictionalizing the case. And so you would just say, I can't do that because the protagonist didn't say that. And, you know, make sure that the reviewer knows I considered what you requested, but I can't do it. And that generally goes a long way with reviewers. So if we get to the accept part, then we get to publication. And there are sometimes issues there where you might have to do copyright, authorizations because you've used some material that needs to have a permission to publish and those kind of things. But otherwise, it goes significantly well, and you get your case published, people start using it, and it becomes fabulous. And that is the end. And I see Murad is back on, so I think my timing is pretty good today.
Great timing, absolutely. Thank you so much. As you were talking about all of these things, I'm reflecting on my own experience right now, writing a teaching notes for the case. So this was, from a selfish perspective, this was really a great discussion. We do have quite a few questions, and I would like to address these. Just a quick note, some of these questions are about the case writing itself, the components that they make up the case, and some of them are even about the idea. So I'm going to leave those to the end. I know some of these were already answered in part 1, part 2, and for everyone's information, some of these questions have already been answered, and the answers are already, and the discussion is already in the recording for part 1, part 2. So I'm going to focus on the questions that deal specifically with teaching notes and the publishing process. The first one is, if we have a list of, asking for a list of organizations where we can present our teaching cases. I think this is a resource I know that, will be very, very helpful. Some type of, this is the organization that you should consider if in fact you would like to present your case or submit the case.
I do have that information. I wrote it for my book. And so I can provide that when we send out the slides. I have the different organizations and the typical time for their annual meeting, and their submission dates are usually about 6 months ahead of the time. And so there are a lot of really good ones. And I think you'll find, as I did when I went to my first case workshop, it was so refreshingly enjoyable. People are really committed to teaching. They're very committed to case writing, and very supportive. And so, I immediately decided, okay, I'm going to be a case writer, and I'm only going to go to case workshops because it was such a friendly environment.
Very nice. I think that's going to be very helpful for our guests today. One other question is, how long does it typically take to go through the review and get the case published from the first submission, I guess, to the point where the case is published?
It's taking longer than I would like right now because with COVID and all of the other things, our review process is a little bit slower than it normally is. I have to wait for the reviewers to return the reviews. And then some of it's the case authors themselves. I mean, they have a list of things they need to do to revise the case. And sometimes that can take several months before they finish the case. So we have published cases fairly quickly. I just accepted a case without any revision, which has never happened before. I was pretty shocked, but it's a very topical case that we wanted to get out very quickly. And so we were able to do it within about 2 months. But that normally it's 6 months to a year, unfortunately.
Okay. Good to know and good to plan accordingly. A question about the instructor manual. You mentioned that the instructor manual should be singled out as a scholarly contribution separate from the case itself. Are you recommending that it be listed separately as another publication? Is that because I know we submit a couple cases and we never really even included whether we have a teaching note with it or not in terms of the annual reports that we submit.
I think there are a couple of ways you can do this. I typically will list the case and I'll say case and instructor's manual. And then in the supporting documents, I make sure that I provide a copy of the instructor's manual so that they can see that contribution. And then I think, you know, it kind of relies on us to educate our evaluators. And so a lot of times I will talk about the instructor's manual as the scholarly contribution and point them to the theory section and, you know, and all of those things. And so, you know, I also did like brown bag presentations about how case research is done and things like that to kind of educate the people that were going to be reviewing my materials so that they knew what to expect with the case. And I think a lot of people just don't know that it takes the two pieces. You can't publish without an instructor's manual. And it's a lot of work. I mean, it really is a pretty extensive paper. So the Nike case, by the time I got the case and the instructor's manual, it was 60 pages long. You know, most other people's publications aren't 60 pages long, but that one needed to be. And so it was. You know, so I think we have to educate the evaluators some. And, you know, I've given a presentation at an AACSB Dean's Conference on case writing and why it should be considered scholarly contribution. But I mean, it's a battle that we continue to fight.
Yeah, yeah. And I know that I used a few cases where the instructor manual was actually had more pages than the case itself. So you see that quite often. You do see, though, some cases, I know, for example, on some of these websites, Ivy and Harvard, say no instructor manual available. So they do publish. What's your take on that angle of not having an instructor manual at all?
Well, I know that Harvard always compliments NACRA authors on the quality of our instructional support and materials that we provide. So cases that are published in the Case Research Journal are distributed through the Harvard Business Publishing. And they always say, okay, we wish that our instructors would write materials that are as lovely as the ones that your authors do. It is an issue. I mean, there are a lot of people that won't adopt a case without an instructor's manual. And so it does impact adoptions. And I think it's only Harvard and Ivy that will publish anything. Most journals will not touch it without an instructor's manual.
No. The logistics aspect, couple of questions here. What is the cost of publishing a case in the case journal?
Zero.
That's what I thought.
It costs me a lot, but it doesn't cost the author.
That's a good answer. Best answer. Another one also about the mechanics aspect. If your case is slightly over 1,000 words, it's still considered a compact case.
Well, this is one of the issues. We don't usually publish it if it's over 1,000 words, but if you want to submit it as a compact case, we'll try to help you identify ways to cut it down so that it can qualify.
Okay.
I think there's some value to this. I mean, we've talked about should we raise our word limit on these, but to have to think critically about what's essential in this case and how can I communicate it most effectively, there's a lot of value to that, and it adds quality to the case itself. So what we might do with a case that's a little bit overweight is we might say, well, what if you'd put this in an exhibit instead, because the exhibits don't count toward your word limit. And so we might help the author identify ways that they could make it better fit what our requirements are.
Okay. Okay. Our guests and participants today come from every corner of the globe. So I know that there are different processes, different way of running things. But this question is, can you talk about how the payment for cases works in some outlets? Are the authors paid a flat amount, or in our case, can case be purchased? So this is, I'm not sure if that is the case, maybe in some journals or associations, I'm not sure.
Well, it depends on where you publish. There are different models being used at different journals. So the Case Research Journal pays a royalty, and the royalty is depends on adoptions, and you get 50% of the royalty, and the case NACRA keeps the other 50%. You have to be a member of NACRA to get it. And I do know people that get thousands of dollars for cases that they've published. Our Nike case went better than we thought it would. And first we thought we'd just buy dinner with the royalties, but we wound up, we could like go someplace and buy dinner, go to a different city and different part of the world, but it just really went well. And, but we also have cases that I know authors have asked, well, how many adoptions did I get? And we've had to say, you got 0. And so what we recommend then, if you didn't get any adoptions, is that you need to promote your own case. And, there are ways to do that with social media and things like that. Hey, if you're teaching this topic, I've got a great case for you, and to increase your adoptions. The case journal, we pay a flat fee, and the flat fee is $100. And we also give then access to the journal and the teaching notes for a period of a year, I believe. And so it just depends on who is publishing your case. So the case journal distributes to the case center, but the royalties that would normally go to the author go to Emerald, because Emerald owns the case.
Yeah, good enough. So that was answered. In the editorial review, I know there's a check for plagiarism, and the question here is, what systems are being used right now to check for that?
I really don't know. I can't answer that. I think it depends from journal to journal. I mean, I know that they are checking plagiarism and trying to, make sure that we don't accept journal articles that have been copied from others. A lot of times we have to be careful, and some of it you have to be somewhat self-vigilant. I found one of my cases had been copied and was being distributed totally unknown to me by somebody else. And, so basically I had to write a letter and say, this is my case and I didn't authorize this. And then they took it down. But, sometimes you just have to kind of watch to see if your stuff's being ripped off.
Yeah. Then, Deepa, there's an interesting question here. Can we include evaluation rubrics in the teaching notes?
You can, and a lot of instructors will find great value in that. That would be a value-added component that the reviewers would love. If you have a rubric that you've developed and used in class and you include it as part of the case, that would be one of those things that they would look at and say, oh, look, this person's been really generous, so let's work with him or her.
Couple of questions here from William. In writing a case about a personal experience, I think this goes back to some of the topic maybe mentioned earlier. Can I change the names and be non-specific to protect the institutions where the issue took place?
That's called a disguised case, which is different than a fictional case. Disguised case, we can protect people by changing their names, although you have to be a little careful about what names you choose, because if it's like Bill Smith, everybody knows it's a disguised case, and students tend to stop reading once they figure that out. So you really want to choose names that are appropriate and interesting. And you can disguise the organization as well. Sometimes the editor, though, will want to make sure that it's not a fictional case. And so in some cases, the editor will ask you, well, what organization is this really? And will not disclose that. I recently had a submission where it was a case about a very well-known company and a very well-known CEO, and the company would not authorize publication of the case. And the authors asked, can we disguise it? And I said, you really can't, because the issues in the case are unique to that particular organization. And you could change it to the XYZ Corp, but it really wouldn't work. And so that one is a kind of a lesson to share over cocktails at a case workshop. Don't start writing a case if you can't get a permission to publish.
Yeah. I have a question about something you mentioned about convincing a reviewer. We run into a specific situation where the case was okay, but the teaching notes, and just because of the highly biased nature, and you had to take it's a very strong issue but you had to take a stand. How would you handle that, where there's not the issue is not with the case, but with the teaching notes?
You would basically, I usually create a table and I say, okay, the reviewer said this, this is what I did, and this is why. And you would just explain the bias, and then you would expect that the editor would intervene and the editor would overrule the reviewer. If the reviewer is asking you to do something, very controversial or biased, you would expect the editor to, and you could, call the editor or email the editor and say, look, the reviewer is asking me to do something and I just really can't do it because it's not appropriate. And, we're people, we would listen to the argument and hopefully find a way to work through it. Some of it might be about achieving balance. We talked about objectivity and providing both sides of an issue. And so we might suggest that you take that approach in the teaching note and say, okay, answer this question from the perspective of this stakeholder, but then also answer it from this stakeholder's perspective so that we have both.
Okay. And that's exactly what we are running into right now, having to take both sides and explain both of them without telling the students that they need to take one or the other, as long as they support their reasoning. Right. Well, a couple more questions here. Do you need to get a company's permission to publish if all research documents are from media reports or other public sources?
That's called a secondary research case or a library case, and you do not need permission to publish from those. The only issue that Emerald would have if you did a case based on secondary sources, or if you cut and pasted the financial statements or things from their website in the case instead of creating your own exhibits, they might ask you to get permission to use those. And it would depend upon the situation. If it's a really controversial situation and they're afraid of perhaps getting a libel lawsuit, they would ask more than they would if it was just, a regular kind of not so controversial issue. So, I mean, you can do it. I've written a lot of cases based only on secondary sources. A lot of times ethics cases or org behavior cases tend to be written that way if the issue is particularly controversial, because you can then cite the reports. But then you have to also critically evaluate the secondary sources to make sure that you're not using, like really out there kind of sources that aren't credible. And you want to be able to then provide both sides. So I've got to have secondary sources for the people that are for this issue. And I also have to have secondary sources for the people that are against this issue.
Very good. And related to this question, quite interesting actually from Stephanie, do we still need to seek permission from the company if the company no longer exists? It merged with another company and its name may be changed and so on and so forth.
I would be careful about that kind of a case because you could still be sued by the merged company. And so you would probably need to get a permission from the existing company, not the old company. And the reason I would say you have to be careful is if that happened, you're writing about an issue, a historical issue, a case that's very dated. And you'll find that it's not as engaging for students. Our students basically want something that's within the last 3 years. If it's longer than that, they typically, tune it out and say, how is this relevant? This is, not addressing the rise of the internet. It's not addressing COVID issues. It's not doing, it doesn't represent the world as we experience it. And so they tend to spend less time doing those kind of cases, unfortunately, because a lot of historical cases have good teaching value to them. But, if students won't read it, then it's kind of hard to get to that learning outcome.
Interesting. We have one point, I hope I have room to follow up on that specific point. But one question here from Carlos, how long ago the situation of the case could be? For instance, can I make the case from the 90s if the issues are still relevant today?
Well, sometimes we'll look at the issues. Think about an HR case about discrimination, for example. The issues are still relevant today, unfortunately. And so sometimes we'll look at it and say, does it really need to be dated the way it is? Can we deal with the issues without saying it was in the 1990s? If it's still relevant, can we write it in a sense to be time unspecific so that students will engage with it? But if you start out, disco was king and there's a mirror ball in the boardroom, a lot of students just turn it off. I mean, it's like, why am I reading this? This is not going to be part of my life. And it takes a great deal of lifting from the instructor to get them to engage.
Very good, very good. And to that point, there are a couple of classic cases that many of us love. Shell in Nigeria is one of them. And I find sometimes providing an update on the case or an article to show the students that it's still continuing as of last week, sometimes provides that extra kind of relevance that we talk about.
Well, and sometimes students, instructors will use an assignment and say, okay, student, you update this case.
Yeah.
What's happening, and have a group do a little presentation or something like that. And that can be real value. But you really have to work a little harder if it's an older case.
Thank you, Rebecca. Very, very interesting, very, very helpful. And it was a delight to chat with you. And I know I enjoyed it. I know my colleagues enjoyed it. And I'm going to pass now to our chair, our leader, Leanne Liu.
Thank you, Rebecca and Murad, for this really wonderful series with fantastic in-depth insights and materials. Thank you, everyone, for joining us from all over the world. I'm sure you will continue your conversations and communications with Rebecca. Just a reminder to please respond to our survey as you exit. We look forward to seeing all of you again in our future webinars. Have a great day, everyone.